Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning. My name is Kelvin Alvarez Kinraha, a representative from the professor team Dr. Alfi Syahrin, SHMH, North Sumatra University. Here, I will present a PowerPoint entitled Development of Legal Protection, the Protocol for Victims of Domestic Violence that improve the quality of life and reproductive health of women during the COVID-19 pandemic in Medan. Here are the slide. 1. Introduction. North Sumatra Province, especially Medan City, which a developing city, is supported by people who have a fairly high rhythm of life. This has an impact on the vulnerability of domestic violence. They show that cases of violence against women in Medan are very high, and estimates from this data cannot represent the whereabouts of all women who have experienced violence, because as is well known, some women view violence as a disagree, so they prefer to remain silent with violence rather than expose their domestic problems to general problem. What is that? He told. This research is a normative legal research based on literature and field studies on the formation of a criminal law system related to the law on the elimination of domestic violence using descriptive analysis. Sukanto Surjono, 2007, regarding the nature of the research. This research was conducted in the city of Medan with the consideration that at that location there were several cases of domestic violence KDRT committed by the husband against his wife. Discussion. A. Low knowledge of women or wives about domestic violence. Before counseling was given, the respondent knowledge, namely women or wives, was still low about domestic violence because respondent did not get information about definition, types, factor, and law that govern domestic violence, and were still influenced by several factors, namely personal experience, the influence of other people who were considered important, culture, mass media, educational and religious institutions, as well as emotional factor, and more dominant is respondent. The reason remain negative after intervention is culture. It is not easy to change the culture that has long been applied in one life. The culture that occurs is that the position of women is lower than that of men. So, the respondents are afraid and silent when experiencing domestic violence. B. Legal protection for victims of domestic violence and law enforcement efforts. The law on the elimination of domestic violence regulates alternative sanctions from the criminal code, while only regulates imprisonment and fines, namely in the form of social work programs and intervention imposed on the perpetrators. This is intended so that the perpetrator does not return to violence, because so far the problem of domestic violence is considered a private problem, so that violence that occurs is not easy to intervene and can create enforcement for victims of domestic violence as legal protection law enforcement of the PKDRT law cannot be separated from law enforcement in general. If the state is unable to create a rule of law, then the protection applied in the Picardiati, law will only take the form of law in a book or theory, while in law in action practice, it will be difficult to materialize. Therefore, the rule of law must be able of efforts to prevent and eradicate domestic violence must be carried out as law enforcement of the law on the elimination of domestic violence, which is carried on jointly between the government and the community as well as the victims of violence themselves. This is because domestic violence, whether physical, physiological, or sexual, is a complaint often so that good cooperation between our parties is needed. C. Impact of violence on health. Violence against wives need to be exposed in order to find alternative empowerment for wives to avoid acts of violence that should not occur in order to realize women's rights to obtain health, reproductive health. Worldwide, 1 in 4 pregnant women experience physical and sexual violence by their partners. During pregnancy, there can be miscarriage or abortion, immature labor, and the baby dies in the womb. When giving birth, women will experience childbirth complications such as a loss of uterine contraction, prolonged labor, and even surgery. Things that can be given to help women from acts of domestic violence are: number 1, recommended shelters such as crisis centers, one-stop shelters and crisis centers. Number 2, provide psychological assistance and physical care service for victims. Number 3, providing legal assistance in the judicial process. Number 4, train cadres or NGOs to help victims of violence. And number 5, conduct training on the protection of victims for domestic violence to help victims, or Amy Sutriasmi 2004. Number 4, conclusion and recommendation. Number 1, the effective of the wife attitude before and after counseling on domestic violence in Medan City relate to knowledge of domestic violence board, the protocol for reporting cases of domestic violence, which aims as a legal protection protocol for victims of domestic violence, especially women. Number 2, legal protection for victims of domestic violence has been normatively fulfilled in Law Number 23 of 2004 concerning the elimination of domestic violence, but it is necessary to further implement these provisions in the form of policy and action. This law expects to provide legal protection for victims of domestic violence and to restore the right of victims of domestic violence, especially for women, with the aim of improving the quality of life and reproduction of women in Medan City. Number 3, violence in household is a type of crime that lacks attention and scope of criminal law. Form of violence can take the form of physical and psychological, sexual, verbal violence, and household neglect. The impact of violence against wives on reproductive health can affect of psychology of the mother, so that there are disturbances during pregnancy and childbirth, as well as after childbirth and the baby is born. What must be done is to provide psychological supporting to victims, provide provide assistance, provide physical care to victims, and recommended a woman crisis center. Thank you. This is the PowerPoint presentation. I convene in the proceeding of the 2020 UMGE SHIC International Seminar, Muhammadiyah University of Gresik. For your attention, I say thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.